Hello, folks. This is Fabian and Nick, and we're going to talk about our build board in Geo and how we use some of GitLab's capabilities to manage issues and epics, and why we believe this is overall useful. Let me just share my screen. Need to set something up. Okay. There we go. Okay. So for everybody watching, this is a little bit in the context of our product development flow. So we're not going to touch on the validation track. We are going to touch more on the build track because this is, what Nick and I talk about most, I'd say. So yeah, maybe I'll hand it over to you, Nick. Maybe you can give us a quick walk through our build board and how we use it and what you like about it, and then yeah.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'll have to give you and the previous Geo manager, Rachel, for really figuring out the core of this workflow. I was lucky enough to come into the team and have a lot of this set up. Although, yeah, I think the newest thing that we've incorporated since I've been with the team, because the functionality didn't become available, organizing the board by epics and using the new swim lane functionality. So just a high level overview. So the board is scoped to the Geo active label. So so that way we can filter out any issues, and there are a large amount with the group Geo label, and just focus the board on what we are currently working on or plan to work on in the very near future. I don't think we have a specific time frame on that. I'd say maybe things that we're looking at in the next week or two. Sometimes things will end up sitting on the board for a while, and since we have weekly scheduling calls, that's always a good time to reevaluate things that may be sitting in the open or ready for development column for too long, and decide if they really are items that we are going to work on. So once something gets the Geo active label applied, then if it doesn't have a workflow label on it, then it ends up in the open column. And then we use the workflow labels to manage and track the progress across the board to a closed state. So we can see here that, for example, in this test maintenance mode epic, we have a couple of items in the open column, which means we want to investigate those pretty soon. They may even be ready for development.
I was just thinking it. I'm going to move them over because actually they should be here.
Yeah, and I think it's probably fair to say, feel free to disagree, that by the time something hits the board and gets the Geo active label, it's probably at least ready for development.
Yeah. No, I think this is great, great context, and we see some of the small usability issues here. Sometimes these things don't work. No, so actually, why we also really like this mode here is, just highlight this. This is our current focus in the team, right? To reach complete maturity for the R, and everything is organized into these different epics here, which for example, deal with creating a maintenance mode and whatnot, and you can visualize this in a roadmap view if it decides to load. And so having sort of an epic tree behind this that says these are the larger goals that we're trying to reach, right? And why? And then filtering it down to the small issues is what makes this possible. But the build board, I think, as you said, should really only contain work that is ready for development and can be picked up by an engineer. And what's important to me is, in the spirit of Gabe, so if you're watching, a shout out to you. I personally am more interested in moving things quickly from ready to development into closed, and not so interested in having to adhere to our release process for self-managed software, which is our milestones for releases, because we want to finish things as quickly as possible based on the highest priority possible. And so by only putting items onto the Geo active board, we really keep the team focused on what we think is most important right now to reach our overall goals here. And this is why we scope it to a relatively small set of items, because otherwise you have everything that Geo should work on, hundreds of issues here, and then thousands of issues in the closed column. It's not super nice. So yeah, I think that's sort of my perspective on it. And the nice thing about the Epic swim lanes is or at least I think this is also why you started it initially, is you get sort of an overview of, do we have too many things happening in parallel at the moment, right, for the team? And so at the moment, for example, we have a few, probably, like, it looks a little bit more than it actually is, because we have sort of test gaps in Geo that actually belong to testing maintenance mode, and maintenance mode in turn is something else here on the board. So it looks a little bit larger, but it focuses overall on these sort of core initiatives that we're working on. So for example, here, testing for maintenance mode is something that's actively being worked on by a couple of team members. Pushing Petroni into beta support is another sort of initiative. You can kind of see the flow of these issues through the overall working board. So that works, I think, quite well for us.
Yeah, and just kind of a little tangent here. Something that I like about this and how we've set it up is that we've also brought in our quality engineering counterparts. So like when you were mentioning test gaps, we not only have an overview of what the development team is doing, but we also bring quality engineering into this. And so we, as much as possible, try to bring their work and issues into here so we can really get a holistic sense of what's going on in Geo.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that has been quite successful. I think the other thing that makes this work, and I'll hide some of these things now and hope that it loads. It may not. No. So for example, even this other view, which I still use quite a bit, rather than the Epic views, gives you also a good overview of all the work that has happened in the last week or so, and then how many things are done in parallel. Is this too much, right, that's going on? Are there things that we should reduce? Are there too many things ready in ready for development? Is it overwhelming? So it helps us, I think, also sort of intuitively understand the size and shape of where things are at, which I think is really nice. And because this remains stable, as in it's never going to change. The link is stable. I have it bookmarked, right? I only need one place where I go. And so if I want to know in detail where we are at, I can look in the board. But I think we should also highlight the importance of what we call the scheduling call, right? Which is more
Yes.
of a walking the board activity. Yeah, what do you like about it? Or maybe you don't.
I don't know. I think we should do away with the scheduling call. No, just just kidding. The scheduling call is great. I think it is probably the key part of what makes all this work, because it can certainly be easy to set up a nice board and then let things kind of go stale quickly and not reflect the actual state of what's going on. So I think it's important to have something like our weekly scheduling call, a regular recurring meeting with a clearly defined process where we go through everything. We used to go through column by column, starting with close and then going backwards. And then recently, since Epic swim lanes were added, we now can go through epic by epic. And most epics have at least one engineering owner. We try to have multiple engineers focused on an epic to help focus our efforts and spread knowledge as much as possible. And so that way we can, if that engineer is on the call, we can get a high level overview of where things are at in that epic. Otherwise, usually I'll provide an update from the engineering side, and then we'll have we talk about that. Sometimes we need to update the progress of things, like something is actually in review versus in dev, or something can be closed. I think, and then you will often talk about the priority of something, or kind of help us get the big picture of some work. Yeah, I think it's just it's also so not only is it a great way to just manage the board, but it's also I think a cornerstone of the collaboration between the PM and the engineering team.
Yeah, no, I actually agree. I mean, for me, it's probably one of the most valuable activities in the week. Not so much because I want to understand every little issue that we're facing in development, but more because it allows us to talk about these items and why they're important and how they're going and what we're trying to achieve. And I think having that context is really valuable. If we look at Petroni, right, just checking in and saying, like, I think we had a discussion this week where we were like, do we need to do all of the things that are currently in this epic for beta? Is this bloated? Should we cut some scope, right, to iterate faster? I think having these touch points really frequently helps everyone in the team to have enough context. Plus, when things become stale, we see them we see them not after 4 weeks, 2 days before the release, right? We see this and we can react very quickly. And so I really like that personally. So yeah, I think that's kind of it. I think if I had to summarize it from my perspective, is it requires some prerequisites, right? You will not benefit from having epics if you don't have an epic tree. But regardless of that, having a single board that actually corresponds to our product development workflow here, I think is pretty useful. Scoping it to only the things that are actually going to be worked on, I think is also really important. And keeping like an eye on the board and keeping it up to date. Because if you don't, right, I think as any process, and we talked about that before, it's like it is sort of the ability to make it a ritual, something that the team sort of understands and gathers around, right, where the collaboration happens. I think that's important.
Yeah.
I think the last thing that we forgot to mention is, I think every week when we see how many things are closed, we have an opportunity to celebrate that as well. It's like often we've talked about those things 4 times in the call and talked about the difficulties and why that's maybe challenging or whatnot, right? And then you see it closed and people are excited to see their own velocity. And that's something that happens, not only at the release post, but continuously. And I think that's really important, especially if you have larger initiatives that will maybe span some time.
Yeah, agreed. One other point I wanted to make is that anyone can bring an issue onto the board. So this isn't something where only Fabian or only Fabian and me can decide what goes on the board. Anyone can bring it on the board, and because we have this weekly call, we can then sort of revisit, like, okay, someone felt this was important enough to bring on the board, and we trust, we have a lot of trust that that everybody has a good sense of the priorities, and that we can reevaluate if we need to during these weekly calls.
Yes, I think this is actually also really nice, because let's say there's a high priority bug that happened, I think last week or a couple of weeks ago. We had an issue. Douglas saw it, thought this is important, felt empowered to assign it to himself, pulled it onto the board, started working on it, explained it in the scheduling call, closed it. And that's, I think, the dynamic that I really appreciate, where that is something that can just happen and you don't need to say, oh, I will, like schedule this for prioritization in 6 weeks when the next planning cycle starts off, right? It should be able, like everybody should be able to do this because those are the things that, matter to our customers often, right? And then, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and because we had this process, it wasn't just something that sort of happened on the side and then didn't really get recognized, but there was everybody got visibility into it because of the way the board works and our scheduling call.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's kind of it. I think that's a good overview. I realized talking through that there's actually a lot of things going on, and we've been doing it for a while, and I think we have it documented, so that's good. But I love it. It's my favorite way of working, and for anybody who has watched this to the end, we're super happy to help set this up. If you need any help or have any questions, just try it out. And thanks, Nick, for being an awesome partner and for doing all of this with us. It's really fun.
Thank you. Likewise.
Cool. I'll stop.